We're reaching the end of the course content. So this is going to be my last content lecture. That is content, I mean the various themes we've treated from week to week. What's left is the serious task of writing in a way that's connected with the body, with your experience, with your soul, instead of academic gossiping. Big task, but a different one than we've been dealing with in terms of content. So the final theme, which I hope you were led into by reading Lee Young Lee's poem and my reading of Lee Young Lee. A huge problem. We could spend the whole course on this, which is the problem of suffering. The problem of suffering. Strangely, I was just reminded this morning as I was preparing these thoughts of sort of what was changed my life, a very important time when I was a freshman in high school. I never thought of myself as any kind of a serious thinker or anything like that, or particularly bright or whatever. And this young Christian brother, in the early days of our freshman year in high school, asked me to write a term paper on the problem of suffering, and after reading the book of Job in the Bible. Wow, that was quite a thing. I thought, wow, the problem of suffering. Some of you know the book of Job. God decides to test him by seeing if he really loves him, really is dedicated to God, or just his own private concerns. And so it's kind of a weird a weird thing to think about now. But so God, Yahweh, visits every imaginable horror on Job to see whether he will stay faithful to God even in the midst of the worst suffering. Of course, Job does. So that was my initiation to the problem of suffering, which is not, I laugh, but it's a profound issue. It's profound because here we are. What do we do with it? Here we are right now with this pandemic. Here we are with people dying. Here we are where I'm sort of afraid to walk outside every time I read the paper that I'm in danger. There's this virus that's just looking for me because of my age and my lung weaknesses. So on the one hand, I'm feeling just wonderful at having a lot of quiet and space to imagine and think more deeply about my life and my loved ones and all of that, and things like this course. But on the other, it feels very, very dangerous to me now. How do I not collapse into fear is a big task that's facing me right now. And some of my friends who are in the same situation that I'm in. So I was carried back to a really big, illuminating experience I had maybe, I don't know, 30 years ago maybe. I went to Europe for the first time in 1973. Lived in Paris for a long time. And one day, before they remodeled it, the Louvre in Paris, I went into the basement where it was not like the ordinary basement. It was the basement of the Louvre, which has, treasures that are unimaginable. So here, sitting there, was this enormous sculpture that Michelangelo had done in his last years of his life. One of a series, I think there are 6 or 8 around the world, called The Slaves. They're carved out of blocks of Carrara marble that are huge. They're probably The cubes are probably 20 feet by 20 feet, or maybe even bigger. And they're rough-hewn cubes, out of which Michelangelo has carved the arms and part of the torso of a human form coming out of the marble, sort of. So they're not, they're not anything like his David, which is a fully formed, beautiful human being all the way from head to foot. They're just these creatures reaching out of this dense marble, and only part of the way, like they're drowning in the marble. And I was so struck by the portrayal of human history. It kind of awakened a kind of a new level of compassion in me about how hard it is to shape a life, let alone be free, to be compassionate, to be kind, to be thoughtful. How hard it is, and how easy it is to give up. The poem of Li Yang Li I picked because it it's one of many. I could have given you many poems, but it's such an expression of America as a country of immigrants, and how being a country of immigrants, it involves a history of lots of suffering of different kinds. Most people who came and have shaped America until this very day are people who had to suffer a lot to get here, either escaping vicious totalitarian regimes that were dispossessing everybody, or the resources in their home countries had given out and there was no food, there were no jobs. Many of our families came here so long ago, we forget that. We forget how hard it was to get here. Certainly true of my family, I'm sure true of most of yours. But we forget those origins. And now, with this crazy anti-immigrant fervor in this country, it seems as if some people talk as if they were not at one time immigrants, struggling to get over the border, struggling to find enough. And once they get here, to find enough work to keep them alive and to keep their families fed. The great wisdom traditions, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, all make suffering the kind of heart of their wisdom teachings, that life is suffering, and how do we deal with that? Do we collapse under it, or do we work to transform it, and do we allow it to open us to our hearts to others? Do we allow the wounds in our hearts to make them more open rather than more closed? So the problem of suffering is a big one. And the great literary poetic traditions of the Western world, starting in Greece, put that front and center. In Aeschylus, for example, in 500 BC, his trilogy of dramas ending in Agamemnon, the story of the tragic story, a crazy story of Helen of Troy, Helen being kidnapped by the Trojans and taken to Troy away from her master, Paris, and Menelaus, the uncle, is sent to get back Helen, and he's got the ships going. He's got the 1,000 ships that the face of Helen launched, and they're caught in the harbor because there's no wind. And Zeus orders Menelaus to sacrifice his only daughter Iphigenia as the price to get them out of the harbor, so he kills his daughter to get the ships out of the harbor. They go, they grab Helen, they come back. It takes 10 years to get back. They get back. Agamemnon finally arrives home, and his wife Clytemnestra plots to slaughter him in um, retribution for killing her daughter. So he goes in and he takes his hot bath. He gets him to take his hot bath, recovering from the journey. And Clytemnestra comes in and stabs him hundreds of times in the bath. And the Greek chorus comes out and sings this powerful song. Ailenon epe tode epe tuo. Pain and misery is the fate of all people. So there we are. How does that impact us now? There's this strange feeling at CIS that Descartes was a bad person. How did we ever become dualistic when it's so obvious we're one, and how great it is to be one, and how great it is to be integral? Not realizing that for most of human history, being in the body has been a source of pain, sickness, illness, and great problems. And still is for most people. So in the early days, being susceptible to the attacks of wild animals, of viruses, of huge storms, of lack of food and famine, life in the body was not, life in the body on the planet is not an easy life. So it's understandable that people would dissociate, would build lives so protected both physically and intellectually that they operate in a dream world far from the dangers of viruses and saber-toothed tigers and the like, and other violent human beings. So the revolution of the 19th and 20th centuries, a return to the body and to the planet in the Western world, is not such an easy task. It looks easier and it says, we got these slogans that are just so stupid. Like, if people have a bumper sticker, it says, if you were in your body, you'd be home now. Well, no, no, many people would not. If people were really paying attention as they're trudging up the roads of Mexico to get here from Guatemala, where they're being tortured, no, it's just not. Being in their body is not safe. It's not viable. So it's a serious task. And I say this at the end because this program that we're in, this umbrella, is transpersonal psychology. And I think it's been a good home for somatics because it does recognize the enormous capacity of the human body to reveal the deep truths of our lives. But only if it's taken in juxtaposition to what we have to go through to get there. So I also think of Rembrandt. I think of Rembrandt often in the sense that any of you have seen Rembrandt's paintings, his actual paintings. The dark pigments are so dark and thick, and it's only because of these dark, thick pigments on the canvas that these little glimmerings of light are all the more brilliant. And I think that's a symbol to me of what the transcendence and transpersonal qualities of somatics and the body are about, is to, instead of collapsing under suffering, to take hold of it, and live within it until it moves. Live within our painful joints, and instead of stopping, to keep moving somehow, and finding companions who help us to move without collapse, who help us to move with more ease. And there's kind of a trap there. Ida Rolf would often say, we were so taken, those of us studying with her, about how great we were becoming, how great Rolfing was, for alleviating the pains that drag so many of us down, that inhibit so many of us. And she would say, you're missing the point here. The point is not just to relieve pain, it's to create a more peaceful and humane world. And I thought she was always just kind of spacey. But I gradually over the years came to realize, well, she saw this twofold aspect of returning to the body. Having to indeed face the extreme suffering that we have to deal with if we're going to do that. And it's only through that gateway that we get to a special kind of transcendence that's rooted in this world, that's rooted in the deep suffering that other people, as well as ourselves, are going under. And to me, that's the key to diversity. One of the terrible snares in diversity is to compete about who has suffered more than others. It's a deadly topic that I cannot talk about my suffering because, of course, I'm a white male, a white privileged male, and so someone else does not want to listen to me. And there's good reason for that. I can certainly understand it. But that does not lead to a collaborative community. We have to get beyond that. So to me, the task is to really take seriously our shared sufferings and articulate that clearly, not in a competitive way, but in a narrative way of telling our stories in the ways that I've been asking you to write these last 8 weeks or so, or how many ever weeks we've been, 10 weeks or whatever. So that it's clear that you are, the work you've done, the work you have done to get here. It wasn't just kind of a flight of fancy, but you struggled to get here. And to lay those struggles out so that we can see, we can appreciate the prices that each person has paid to be in the room. And out of that, to find the vast amount of caring and love and creativity that might emerge if we could only be together, moving out of that restriction and pain and sluggishness, lack of energy. So there we are. The rest is silence.